Hey there for folks that are just joining us. We have quite a lot of people registered for this panel. Very exciting. We're just going to wait a couple of minutes before we get started with questions for the panelists and our introductions. So sit tight, get yourself some water, uh, check your mouse battery, and yeah, we'll get started soon. I see we've got some folks trickling in. Thank you so much for joining us today. We'll be getting started in just a minute. We're just giving folks a minute to join the panel. So sit tight and we'll get started shortly. All right. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining. Welcome to our fourth annual Field Inclusive Week. We are excited for you to meet our panelists momentarily. My name is Miranda Jacoby. I use she and her pronouns. I'm an independent animator making short films about environmental issues impacting birds. I volunteer with Field Inclusive, a young nonprofit working towards amplifying and supporting marginalized and historically excluded biologists and researchers who professionally work in the outdoors. Just so you are aware, today's webinar will be recorded, and recordings will be posted to our YouTube channel throughout the week. So be sure to follow us there for easy access to these recordings again. Shortly, I will introduce our panelists. But first, Field Inclusive would like to recognize and give special thanks to our sponsors for Field Inclusive Week 2026, the Nature Conservancy, North Carolina Chapter, Tangled Bank Conservation, the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences, and one individual sponsor. Thank you for coming on board as our sponsors for Field Inclusive Week this year and for being dedicated to promoting and supporting a more inclusive outdoors. It is through organizations like yours and the many individuals who donate to support Field Inclusive's mission that we can continue our goals in raising awareness when it comes to social field safety issues by hosting events like Field Inclusive Week, as well as providing financial support to our panelists, speakers, and marginalized and historically excluded individuals who professionally work outdoors. Now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce our panelists for today's discussion. Jaida Elcock, pronouns she and her, is a PhD candidate in the MIT WHOI Joint Program for Biological Oceanography, who studies basking shark and whale shark movement, ecology, and habitat use. José G. Gonzalez, pronouns he and him, is the inaugural Equity Officer for the East Bay Regional Park District, whose work focuses on equity and inclusion frameworks and practices in the environmental, outdoor, and conservation fields. Dr. Erika Marin-Spiotta, pronouns she and her, is professor of geography at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where she leads the Biogeochemistry and Biogeography Lab and the Transforming Research and Education Environments TREE Collective. A huge welcome and special thanks to all of our panelists today for agreeing to share their time and experiences with our audience members. This discussion will take a round-robin style, where I will introduce a question, and I'll give all of our panelists some time to answer. Audience members, please feel free to submit questions for our panelists for the Q&A portion, which will be towards the end of the webinar today. All right, so the first question I'm going to ask is, can you briefly describe your organization's mission, how it engages with diversity, equity, and inclusion within the natural sciences, and particularly in outdoor or field-based work? And I'm going to go to José first for this one.
Thank you, Miranda. And hi, everybody. I'll be as pithy as I can be. Share a little bit about some of the multiple hats that as well in terms of kind of my career. So shared right now, presently, I'm the equity officer for the East Bay Regional Park District, which is a special district that I like to say it's the largest special park district in the country. Out in the East Bay in the San Francisco Bay Area. And in terms of the equity, the Office of Equity is it's a brand new office that we're building from scratch, essentially. And of course, the focus is it's in the title, so it's diversity, equity, and inclusion. Um, and so, as a park district, conservation is a core element of it, and really working with staff and being able to, where it's not already present, normalize what it means. What is the conversation around equity? And I came into this space also as the founder of Latino Outdoors in terms of a community nonprofit to be able to support both that representation, but it's not just the getting people outdoors and connecting with that, but the leadership that also is part of that as well. And so with outdoor and field-based works, no surprise, there is a recreational element, but it's also about the understanding and connection in the professional field of engaging with the outdoors, of which there is a lot of that in terms of who's doing the work. So I'll pause there because I know other questions will dig in a little deeper as well.
Sure. So building off of that, as an equity officer, what are the biggest challenges that you face when you're trying to move equity and inclusion frameworks from theoretical concepts into just the practical application within the park districts and conservation organizations?
I love it. It's a great question because I also I've done my stint as a consultant, right? And then you get kind of brought in to help with the conservation organization. I'll say it very quickly in three ways, right? The challenge is I try to match two different kind of frameworks together. One of them is the supporting effective environments model, C, which really acknowledges that we have our mental models of how everything works and we make sense of it. We have the meaningful action, why we are invested in doing this work, and then the building competence, which is like how do you do it well. Matching that with the water systems change framework, which also has how do you shift mindsets, how do you change structural work like policies, budgets, and whatnot, and then how do you also shift some of the relational pieces like trust and power. So often I tell people like the hardest thing in some spaces isn't necessarily having the money, it isn't necessarily having the policies, it's just changing the mindset of like, what does this mean? When you say equity and you hear that as a, ooh, I'm afraid, what's it going to mean for me? Am I in trouble? Kind of not, then that's really where I'm doing a lot of work. Other times is just developing the policy because we realize it isn't written anywhere. And it'd be very helpful to do that, like setting up an affinity group policy so that we can support affinity spaces within a workplace culture. So I usually reference some of those pieces. Is it structural? Is it relational? Is it a mindset? And then be able to see where we're devoting most of the work on
Great. Thank you so much. I'm going to pose the question, can you briefly describe your organization's mission and how it engages with diversity, equity, and inclusion within natural sciences, particularly outdoor field-based work? I'm going to go over to Jaida. We're going to hear a little bit from her. Thank you so much, Jose.
Yeah, so I am a PhD candidate currently, but I wear a lot of hats, and one of my hats is a co-founder and director of public relations for Minorities and Shark Sciences, also known as MISS. And our goal was for MISS was to provide a community, was and still is to provide a community as well as funded opportunities for gender minorities of color who wish to enter the field of marine science and shark science. And so in terms of field work, field-based research and everything like that, we have several different programs that allow for field opportunities for underserved communities. So we've got spring and summer camps for kids to get their feet wet in marine science, pun sort of intended. We have a program called Diversifying Ocean Sciences, also known as DOS, that provides an online curriculum for a few months for students to kind of, sort of take a class in marine science, oceanography, and then go into a week-long in-person workshop in a few different locations with a few different specialties. So we've had marine technology, we've had field skills, lab techniques, and more. And of course, every year we have our yearly workshops where we partner with Field School in Miami, Florida, and we basically have a weekend-long workshop to teach people, the methods that we use for shark fishing, so that we can tag the sharks, how to do a workup, how to interact with the sharks ethically, and be safe around these animals, and just kind of gives people an opportunity to assess, is this the type of science that they want to do? Some people leave saying, I love field research. This is the best thing ever. Some people leave saying, I hate the field, and this is important that I know this now, and so I can, pivot into maybe more lab focused techniques. And so I think all of those opportunities that we provide are, kind of really important for allowing people to get some experience, get their foot in the door. Especially these are, like I said, funded opportunities. So we always say, from the time you leave your house to the time that you get back to your house, lodging, food, travel, both air travel and ground travel, we do our best to pay for that. And in certain opportunities, provide a stipend as well if you're away from home for a long enough period of time to make sure that these are actually accessible for people who, have jobs and families and things to take care of at home.
That is really fantastic work that you're doing there. Like, that's amazing. If I can ask a follow-up question to that. So in biological oceanography specifically, what kinds of what are the common barriers that you're seeing to entry for a lot of the groups that you're trying to support and getting into this?
Yeah, so for marine science, in my personal experience being a Black woman, I've seen a lot of people saying, well, Black people don't like to be outside, or Black people can't swim, so why do you want to work in the ocean? Or women aren't strong enough to handle wildlife. I don't understand why you think you can do this. And so just the social stigma around being a person of color, especially a woman of color in a field like this, can be a barrier for some people. And so that's one of the reasons why Miss is so special is we not only provide the opportunities, but create a community for people to come together to, have a place to come to if they're feeling uncomfortable with a certain situation. So that way they have people that, are fully behind them that can help them handle a situation, or just a place where they feel welcome, where they feel secure, where they feel appreciated for the work that they're doing. Um, and of course, yeah, like I said before, financial barriers can definitely inhibit people getting into this field as well. Like I said, people have families, people have jobs. It's hard to take a month away to go do an internship, especially if that internship isn't going to pay you, and especially if you have to pay for that internship. And we fully believe that if you're doing work, you should get paid for it, and you shouldn't have to pay to do work for someone else. So we think it's really important that we're breaking down those social barriers by creating this community and breaking down those financial barriers by using, the donations and the funding that we have to be able to provide opportunities for people to get their foot in the door in a field that they're really interested in participating in.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jada. We're going to move on to Erika. Again, that question is, can you briefly describe your organization's mission, how it engages with diversity, equity, and inclusion within the natural sciences, and particularly in outdoor field-based work?
Sure. Thank you for having me. It's awesome to be here with two groups that I have been excited about and followed through social media, and as a former East Bay resident as well. So thank you both for your work. So I'm here to share about two organizations, more slash programs that I've been involved in. So I'm a professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. But I got really involved in doing this work when I joined the leadership board of a nonprofit, the Earth Science Women's Network, that was focusing on increasing gender diversity in the geosciences, which is one of the least diverse fields in any axis of diversity that you want to pick. The geosciences are one of the worst across them in terms of gender, racial, ethnic diversity, disability status, even first generation. So there's a lot of work to do in that discipline. And then over time, we were able to build partnerships with other organizations and some of the major professional societies in our field. And so we applied for some funding from the National Science Foundation to tackle the problem of sexual harassment in the earth and space sciences, especially starting with the field work, right? This is around the time that Dr. Clancy's field survey came out, right? And a lot of us do field work. And so we partnered with American Geophysical Union and the Association for Women Geoscientists, and quickly realized that focusing just on sexual harassment was not necessary. We needed to focus on identity-based harassment more broadly, and also think about other hostile and exclusionary behavior. So we've really been focusing on those aspects of exclusion in the discipline. And we've been developing we developed and now offer bystander intervention training for scientists and faculty. At the time that we developed this, at my university, we didn't have even sexual harassment training for faculty and researchers. It was mostly just focused towards students. And so that's one of the big one of the big aims that we've taken is educating people about the problem and then providing strategies for how to address hostile and exclusionary behaviors when they happen in the lab, in the field, at conferences. And then we've also, kind of this community education and organizing, right, through the bystander intervention. We've also done a lot of work on policy. And so working with professional societies in our disciplines, both in the earth and space sciences, but also the ecological sciences, because there's a lot of overlap in our fields, working on codes of conduct and expanding definitions of ethical codes of conduct to include harassment, bullying, and discrimination under the umbrella of scientific misconduct. So it's getting taken as seriously as like plagiarism and data fabrication. And so that's been really, we've been able to build a lot of partnerships and collaborations with different types of organizations, which I think has allowed us to have kind of national impact, both in terms of what's happening with research groups, and then also with our societies, even thinking about, federal policy as well. And then one of the other projects that I wanted to talk about today was another collaboration. That's a key theme of a lot of the work we do, are partnerships and collaborations with the field safe team out of the University of Colorado Boulder. We were successful at getting additional NSF funding to build the Advancing Field Safety program, which is an online training for research groups on both inclusive team culture and also assessment of hazards in the field, which include not just, the physical hazards, but the social hazards as well. And that's been a really fun collaboration as well.
Thank you so much. As a follow-up question to that, so given your experience as a professor of geography and lead PI, what is the most significant barrier that you've encountered when trying to implement diversity, equity, and inclusion frameworks within just the traditional natural science institutions?
Yeah. So you asked me about not necessarily barriers to participation, but barriers to implementation of interventions, right? If I heard you correctly. So a lot of it is getting buy-in from leadership. So that's one of the things that, sometimes it's hard to do that within your own institution. And so one way that we've tried to get around that while working within the institution to try to make sure you got the right people at the table, to be able to kind of institutionalize policies, right, and change what's happening structurally within the organization. I think building partnerships among nonprofits, among professional associations, we've been working on like, how do you change expectations and the culture of the discipline, right? Because a lot of us, might move from one organization or institution to another, but our identity as part of the discipline might carry with us, right, throughout our career, or we might have multiple identities, but we still sometimes like feel more identified with a discipline than a particular organization. So if we can try to change the narrative about what is acceptable behavior, what's unacceptable behavior of how we treat people in our discipline, then that's a way that we can try to change the culture from the outside, and that kind of trickles down into the institutions. And so we've actually seen, for example, departments take on like the code of conduct and code of ethics of their professional societies that, were stronger, right, than what's happening at the institution, within their own organization.
Oh, that's amazing. That's awesome. Okay, so we're going to go to the next broad question for everybody, which is talking not just the implementation, but the barriers themselves, right? What are some of the most persistent barriers that you see to equity and inclusion in outdoor or field-based scientific professions, and how is your organization or organizations working to address them? And I'm going to start with you, Erika, but we're going to go to Jose next to just give you a moment to prep on that. So,
sure. I think there's both Jose and Jaida shared some of the barriers earlier. I'll talk more about the ones that our program has focused on, which have been kind of the hostile and exclusionary behaviors in terms of thinking about, the daily microaggressions that people experience, right? The very often, abusive behavior that people experience, right? Like, and so there's still, we were able to conduct a climate survey of both the ecological sciences and the earth and space sciences, and found that, these behaviors are really prevalent, both in the field, in the classroom, in the lab, at conferences. And so, we still we focus a lot in terms of like, especially in the geosciences, we focus a lot on like recruitment. Let's get people excited about, right, going to the field. Let's get people excited about being a geoscientist or a geographer or an ecologist. But we don't always think about the environments that we're bringing people in. And some of those environments are actually really harmful. And so we've been focusing on like getting people to understand, right, that even in a place that might feel very supportive to people, there are people who are being harmed every day. And so how do we recognize that? How do we address that, both in terms of the culture, right, and thinking about how do we take responsibility for our community and for taking care of each other, but then also through the policy work.
All right. Thank you so much, Erika. We're going to go to Jose next. Would you like me to repeat the question?
No, I think I've got, unless you hear me not answering, and then do please cut in and say.
You're good, you're good, you're good.
It's just a good question, and I think as Erika and Jaida pointed out, I'll reference the framework I was saying. It's, I remember early on, right, with a lot of mentors and colleagues kind of saying like the barriers, like we've done a lot of work in understanding and studying the barriers, and it's like, what are we actually doing about them? And so like Jaida kind of share, she's a solutionary in that front, because sometimes it is as a known barrier like cost, especially what the discipline or profession is. It may not be very expensive to just kind of do a walk in the woods type of thing outdoors, but it can get up there once you want to do backpacking and require specialized camping equipment. Or if you're anywhere in the ocean, right, everything, the barrier, the cost can add up in that way. But a lot of the times it's not such a tangible thing, and it is more of the mindset. So as was referenced, can be both how it's externalized and internalized. Externalized is a lot of what gets reinforced as to like, well, they're not really interested, or that they're not going to show up. This isn't really their thing. And then in some communities, you do internalize and say, yeah, that's not for us, right? Or I don't see myself as a fill in the blank. And there's enough research out there that you see that as classic, ask someone to describe a scientist, right? And then it's very easy to default to stereotypes. And a lot of the times, as Erika's mentioning, those stereotypes are pretty harmful because they are very limiting, they're very reductive. And other times it's same thing, fill in the blank. What is outdoorsy? What does conservation work look like? So I'll close this part by kind of showing in some presentation work that we do even here at the Park District. I'd say here's two examples. When I'm talking about like structural elements, I mean like let's look at the historical reality of redlining. And so those are exclusionary policies that it wasn't a personal preference. It wasn't that a Black family, decided I want to live here versus living there. Is that if you wanted to live there and it was redlined for you, there was power at play in terms of everywhere from the loan officer at the bank to what could have been written in the deed. Those were all signs to basically say not for you. And so we're still living with the effects and impacts of those maps. So that's why I tell people like if we're not disrupting and redesigning those maps, then we're probably perpetuating them in some ways. I want to know what the maps of 50 years from now, how they'll look different instead of still dealing with the maps of 50 years ago. And then the final one is like the 2017 Nature of American Studies. I reference that often because there's a very clear example in which they were asking Black demographic, what is your interest in the following activities? And when it says, what is your interest in hiking? The takeaway of that question, what they said, Black adults expressed the least interest because they were the lowest one. But then when you ask the question, what is your interest in walking outdoors? They all shut up. And so I ask people, what is the difference between hiking and walking outdoors? Not even walking outside, but actually walking outdoors. And so it's semi-rhetorical, right? Because what you're asking your body to engage in is more or less the same, but the mental connection and association and affiliation can be so different. And so those are also barriers that show up because for some it reinforces the idea, whether it's external or internal. But for others, to me, I said like the barrier then is addressable. It doesn't mean get rid of hiking. It just means think about what has been associated with that and for who and in what ways and in the cover of what magazine and like you name it. And so those can be pretty clear barriers when you begin to kind of like pick at them and work backwards to like say, okay, what's the thing that we're actually.
Those are some really good points, Jose, especially with just recontextualizing, oh, maybe that specific word that was used has all of this like deep history to it. Just because when a community has been historically excluded, it's like, well, you have to understand what systemically is contributing to that. So I think you talked about that in a really great way. Okay, I know, Jada, I know you talked a little bit about how Miss specifically does try to address financial barriers. Did you want to talk more about how your org um, barriers that you see in equity and inclusion in outdoor or field-based scientific professions and how your org works to address them? Do you have anything more to say about that, or do you think you covered that already?
Yeah, I just wanted to add one quick thing. I really like that Jose kind of brought up this idea of like representation.
Mhm.
I think that for a lot of people, it's hard to see yourself in like a field-based position if you've never seen someone that looks like you in that position before. So for example, growing up, my role models were Jeff Corwin and Steve Irwin, who are two white dudes, and I'm not white nor am I a man. So I mean, they're wonderful people and fantastic role models, but I can also understand how another little black girl like me would see that and be like, wow, those guys do that thing and that's really cool. I wonder what I will do, but it won't be that because I don't see myself represented. Like it makes it so much harder for that to click that that's an option for you. So I think, having this organization like Miss, creates this huge group of scientists that's like, hey, we're out here, we exist. There's so many diverse scientists. Are you a genderqueer Asian person? We have perfect representation for you. Are you a black woman? We have representation for you. Like we have so many diverse types of people who are doing fantastic work. And not only do they get to be the representation for little kids that look like them, but they also get to, I think Miss helps them feel appreciated for the work that they're doing themselves. So I think it's important to be that representation, but it's also important to, make the scientists that are currently in the field feel recognized and important and appreciated for the work that they're doing because that helps retain the scientists that are doing that really awesome work. So yeah, that's all I had to add for that one.
Thank you, Jada. Also, is that a thresher shark in your background?
It is. I didn't take this picture, but threshers are my favorite, and I think that this picture is just gorgeous. So
That is fantastic. But so adding on to your point, so um, how do you ensure that the voices and spirit experiences of historically marginal, wow, okay, let me try that again. How do you ensure that the voices and experiences of historically marginalized communities are meaningfully included in the research programming or conservation efforts that you do? Like what is the process for that?
right. So one of the examples, I think, well, okay, I'll start with an example of we have in our programs, especially when we're piloting a program, we like to do a sort of survey of all the participants, right? These participants are typically from underserved communities. So we're getting voices from those communities saying, hey, how was this program? What would you do to improve it? That way, their voices of not just certain communities, but people who specifically were given a certain opportunity, they can kind of give us an idea of how to better this program for the next batch of students. But then we also have a program called Iconic Oceans, where basically we're making an effort to, include the voices of so many different communities, stakeholders and scientists and policymakers and community members of, disadvantaged communities or Black, Indigenous people of color communities or communities that rely on, the ocean and its resources for survival and economic stability, including all of these voices in certain projects to make sure that, stakeholders, scientists, policymakers, everybody is sort of happy with like the science and the advocacy that is going on. So I think it's really important to include the voices of all the people that are being impacted by certain science and certain policy that is occurring in a certain area. And when it comes to the ocean, coastal communities are absolutely integral to not just how we understand the ocean as a whole, but how we understand the ocean as a whole, but how we go about the science that's in the area. And so I think that including all of these voices is super important, which is why we have this Iconic Oceans program.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that also does echo, I think, a little bit of what Erika was saying earlier about how important it is to have partnerships and collaboration and actually advancing these things, actually getting out there and talking to people and saying, hey, we care about this. Let's work together to try to make this better. I think that's incredibly important.
Exactly. Yeah. If I could add something super quick too, I
Of
think that
course.
it's so important to, collaborations and partnerships are so important because if the entire idea is, to create diversity, equity, and inclusion, the whole point is to, include all these different voices. So having partnerships with so many different organizations, so many different types of people, different communities is what's really going to make science flourish. And it's going to be what supports the communities that rely on certain areas for survival and stability.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jada. So I guess actually a good question to jump off from there would be talking more generally, like what role do various partnerships and collaboration play in advancing DEI goals in the natural sciences and the programs that you're working in, and what makes those partnerships successful? I'd love to hear from Jose next.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'll use Latino Outdoors as an example because sometimes the question would come up is like, how did you make it work? And I said, well, it's because it's been grounded in network leadership principles, which by definition, what they're focusing is how do you support and grow and are part of a network versus just thinking of as an organization. And so where I'm currently in, I like to nerd out. I'm really like interrogating the logic that sets it all up. And so I really looked kind of mentorship from the land and kind of the language of ecology and how that weaves in with the language of social justice. So I say that because then I talk about like, well, it's like mycelial leadership. What you really want to do is have a lot of connectivity, sometimes very underground and not visible, that shows up as the mushroom popping out of the ground. And then that's the org, that's the project, but it's relying on all this connection and partnership. And with Latino Outdoors, it pretty much is done through partnerships. And whether it's through a state park agency, whether it's another nonprofit, whether it's an outdoor brand, like you name it. And we really want to encourage that kind of confluence of interest because it's about mission rather than just organization. And to Jada's point, even I would tell people it's like few conservationists go out there and say that's a beautiful monoculture of a forest. Wow, look how all the trees are exactly the same. And so it's reminding people if you value what diversity brings in an ecological space, we're asking you to not lose sight of that in a social space. And so how do you connect and leverage for that? And you just have to be consistent in the practice of it. And so like I'll close with this part of saying like, so with network leadership principles is asking the questions, how is this mission, not just organization? How is this supporting trust over control? How is this leading with humility instead of just over brand? And how are you building constellations, not just supporting stars?
Awesome. So that was a great metaphor. If I can ask you, Jose, can you tell us a little bit more about the forest that's in your background?
Yeah, so this is not my picture that I took, but I'm a sucker for redwoods. Um, and since you mentioned metaphor, and I'll give this example as I'm telling people of how I pause to see how much reductive mechanistic language maybe has framed why and how we value things. And so if you recall the expression, your team is functioning like a well-oiled machine, and I tell people it's not the machines are bad, it's just like, why is that like the norm? And would it be weird if I come to you and say your team is functioning like a well-nurtured meadow or like a thriving meadow? And if you think, well, that's weird, it's like, why is the machine better if you know meadows are highly efficient, they're productive? I'm just asking you to think about what that means in terms of leadership and productivity and relationships. So that's my metaphor.
Very nice. Thank you so much, Jose. Um, Erika, I know you briefly were talking about broadly like the partnerships and collaborations that you've worked with within trying to advocate some of the goals that you're working for towards DEI and the natural sciences. Do you have anything more you wanted to add to that, or do you feel like that's been covered enough already?
Sure, I can just add, and first of all, Jose, I love your metaphors, and as a soil scientist, I appreciate. Yeah, and I guess one other thing that I'll mention about the building networks and collaborations and partnerships is that in kind of, that's a way of bringing in diverse voices to the work as well. And then thinking about, sorry, I just had a little brain freeze here. What did
It's
I
all
want to
good.
say? Is the one way that I think we've been effective at building these partnerships and maintaining them and expanding them is by listening and learning from each other. That's been really important. And then also recognizing that, you know, we're experts in our own fields, but we're not necessarily experts in doing this work, right? A lot of us are scientists coming into this work because we're, you know, our students, our colleagues, our friends, our peers are affected by these behaviors that we're interested in changing, right? And so it comes from a very personal, you know, from a personal side, but we don't necessarily know all the research that has been done out there, you know, from like the social sciences or the learning sciences, right? That actually, like, I remember I had the opportunity to go to a sociologist for women in society conference, you know, and I got into this work again as a postdoc, and you know, we had this like network of women across the country. Many of them were like maybe like the only woman in their department, right? And so we were so isolated, and it was so gratifying to like find a space where we're like, oh wow, I'm not the only person who feels this way. I'm not the only person who's experiencing these things. And then going to this sociology conference where, you know, people have been studying this for decades. Like there's, you know, there's a reason why we're experiencing these exclusionary behaviors, right? Like there's a historical, systemic, right? And like this context for why we're experiencing this. And if you're isolated and if you're trained as a scientist without like knowing this context, right? It can feel, you know, it can feel kind of very validating and be like, oh, wow, like now I have language to talk about this, right? Like now I actually know that there are evidence-based strategies out there. And so one way to learn that is through partnerships and collaborations and learning across disciplines. And so we've been working with social scientists from both the learning sciences, like psychology, sociology, but also we've taken it upon ourselves to learn that literature and like really engage in that work and doing kind of, you know, mixed methods research, right? And really kind of learning that. And so I think that's been really effective in recognizing, again, that there's a lot we need to learn. We're experts in our field, but we can't really be effective unless we reach out and learn and you know, be vulnerable and recognize that we can't do this work alone. That's one of the things. It's like you need to do it in community. You need to do, first of all, you're going to be more effective, and then you're also going to like reduce the burnout and the harm to yourself, right? And so anyway, that was just like a reflection that I had in terms of some of the collaborations and partnerships that we've been working on.
Thank you so much, Erika. So actually that segues us into another question, which I think I'm probably going to go to Jose first on this one. But so how have you been navigating like the current political climate, right? You know, everyone's been wondering, right, with these attacks on DEI, right? How has that been affecting the concrete work that you guys are doing day to day? And I'm going to start with Jose on this one.
Yeah, perpendicular emotions. So both and the it's you know, I want to affirm to everybody else that is feeling the direct impact that, you know, it is hard. It can be demotivating. It can be just stressful, all the above. And I'm both fortunate to where I'm currently working is that it's not part of a state government or part of the federal government or dependent on some of that federal funding. So we're able to continue on and really try to model by practice and be able to say this is what it can look like in the face of like just direct assault. I want this as meant and for me, personal frustration that it's been so turned upside down in terms of what's the reason for this. And so I know in that aspect, I'm preaching to the proverbial choir. And then the other though is, you know, the question would still come up with like orgs like Latino Outdoors is like, well, what about also there? And same thing, I think by trying to build as much of because I hesitate with the word resiliency because I didn't want it to come across as if like we just have to be resilient. I'm like, why can't just we be thriving or finding all of these ways to do it? But I'm using resiliency in the sense of helping set up some of the foundational work on an organization like Latino Outdoors, where it's like setting it up like the marshlands, setting it up with some of that wetland resiliency that's able to absorb perhaps a little bit of tidal rush and whatnot, and really thinking for the long term. But it is hard because you're also seeing your peers and colleagues either individually being attacked or as organizations or the work devalued, you name it. So I think it's just recognition to share with people that you have to have the both and, in the sense of not ignoring the reality of what is happening while trying to not be consumed by it, because then that's how we definitely all lose, because we lose the leadership, we lose the ability to work through it. So it's I wish it was easier that I could just have both the institutional power or even just straight up magic to be able to unmagic it away. So it is kind of doing that practice work. And I'll close out this way to say, we're not the first, and unfortunately may not be the last generation that has this difficult, right? So many of our ancestors, this is exactly what they were facing on a lifetime generational basis. And so I really look at to be able to say, what's my responsibility as a future ancestor to carry forth some of that as we're still continuing to provide hopefully different models of what it can look like.
Thank you so much, Jose. Let's see. Jaida, do you have anything to add about just how you've been navigating the current political climate and the attack on DEI?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely been difficult because, for me personally, as a co-founder and a co-founder of a nonprofit organization, as well as a graduate student and a person of color living in this time. There's so many things that I have to do that I have to like keep working as if nothing is on fire. Um, which is difficult. And so it is, yeah, a very weird balance of like staying informed without going completely insane, and completely terrifying yourself with all of the things that are in the news, um, not just in the US, but kind of everywhere. But so I think that that is, something that we're all kind of experiencing is, that kind of dread personally within ourselves, trying to figure out what to do next and what's the right thing to do, what's the right next step. Can I panic for a day and then move forward, or like what do we need to do? How do we rally together? But I think that as an organization, we've been impacted because, we get some of our funding through, like NSF grants and things like that. And we've seen huge cuts to organizations like NSF. So that part of it is difficult. That's one of the reasons why we weren't able to actually do our yearly um, workshop weekend out in Florida. We didn't do it last year because we've got to pull back on some of our opportunities so that we're able to still provide the community, because realistically, that is what people really, really need right now, is community, and knowing that there is a group of people behind them that will be there to do their best to protect them and support them during hard times like this. And so, you know, people like we can come together and be like, wow, things are crazy. Does anyone want to share something positive that's happened this week? Just simple conversations like that in our Slack group chats is wonderful. And so, yeah, of course, the frustration of always having to be resilient is there. But proud of us for being able to be resilient. Sometimes it is just about, weathering the storm and doing your best to support each other, until we can come out on the other side a little bit better. So it's definitely difficult, but, we're surviving. Surviving, not thriving is sort of my personal motto throughout a time like this. And unfortunately, that seems to be the case for a lot of people. But as long as we're surviving and we're supporting each other, I think that that's the most important part. So we've been affected, but we have not been, dismantled. We've not been crushed, impacted, but not gone.
Thank you, Jaida. Yeah, there's a lot of strength in like, yeah, stuff's hard, but we're still here and we want to survive it. I'm going to go to Erika. So how have you been navigating the current political climate and the attack on DEI in your programs?
Yeah, pretty similar to what's already been shared. And I think also we've pulled back on some of our programs. We've lost some of our funding, not all our funding, but a lot of our colleagues have lost a lot of funding. Um, so that's been hard to see. So we've also been trying to focus on community and making sure that, yes, maybe we can't do everything that we were doing before. We can't use the language that we fought so hard to get people to use and recognize. But there are other ways to still do this work. And um, so yeah, I think just finding people and finding pockets of people like at our institutions, outside, in other communities, to just keep the hope up and keep doing this work. And I have some, I have a lot of privilege as I'm a full professor, I'm tenured, I have some security in my job, and I have a little bit of institutional power with some of the hats that I wear. And so thinking about, how can I leverage that to keep pushing this work forward, and how can I leverage that to protect people who are in more vulnerable positions? That's kind of given me something to do and focus on, rather than kind of lose, like go into despair with a lot of the things that have been happening. And then also, you know, I've I've also taken this, kind of put it into historical context, like Jose, you were mentioning, like this is not unprecedented times at all. There's a pattern to what's happening, and I think that's, in a way, it's, even though it's kind of like, oh, there's a pattern, we see what's happening, like let's do something about it. I feel like it's been a little reassuring in terms of we've made it to, like, other societies, other countries have made it through this and made it to the other side, and that kind of feels a little reassuring. um I don't know, that's that's kind of where my brain space is right now. But just trying to keep hope, while also recognizing that we're in a really, really difficult time that is not inevitable, right? I often hear a lot of, like, oh, this is, like, these choices that we have to make, like at the institutional level, right, like, are inevitable. It's like, no, these are not inevitable. And even within a lot of the constraints that we have, there's still a lot of ways that we can push forward. And so thinking about, how do we identify those? How do we build collaboration, like partnerships, right? How do we support each other? It's kind of where I've been thinking.
Thank you, Erica. Yeah, that is a really great point about how, like, yeah, things are bad, but we also do have power to build things to make them better. Like, it's not like, oh, the state is always going to be like this. There's the capacity for change there. Um, so jumping off of that, I'd like to thank you, our panelists, once again for sharing your experiences today. This has been a great and engaging conversation, and I'd now like to take some time to open it up to our audience by taking some of their questions that have already been placed in the Q&A chat. So again, audience, if you have a question, please continue to use the Q&A function to share it with us. So go take a look. Okay. We have one from Charlotte Russell who asks, can you give representative examples of entry-level to advanced field intern and camp opportunities and the costs involved to fund or offer scholarships? And I guess this is open to anybody who feels like they would like to answer it.
Um, I have, I guess, an example. So, um, for me personally, what I did, if you're like still in undergrad or in college, that is, well, especially, I guess, specifically in the United States, there is a research experience for undergrads program, that you can often find in many different places that will, be like usually like a several week long. Mine was like a summer long internship where I went out to Friday Harbor Labs, which is with the University of Washington, and, worked on a research project. I got to do some trawling. I got to work with animals. And it was a really awesome experience. So if you're in that age group, that would be like my first initial thought for, looking at certain different levels of like internships and opportunities to get your foot in the door. I will also note that, of course, with the current political climate and cuts to NSF, REU experiences are a bit harder to find. They're not impossible though. There's just not quite as many as there were when science was being funded a bit more readily. So keep that in mind. But REU research experience for undergrads is like the first thing that comes to mind when I think of entry level field-based internships. Not all of them are field-based, but they are out there.
Thank you so much, Jaida. That's awesome. It's a really great reply.
I'll just chime in to say, yeah, the positive was that many programs and pathways were built up recognizing this, and the negative is right now those are being systematically torn down. So especially at the federal level, because we had worked to set up, for example, the Latino Heritage Internship Program through the Park Service and whatnot, working with nonprofit partners to do that. So there's that. There are still some, I think, universities, as Jada's mentioning. So I know, for example, in Colorado, what they'll do is they'll also do week-long field experiences for their undergrad, especially if you have faculty that have been working on this for quite a while. They found ways to kind of like institutionalize that in that process. And then the other one I would say is there may be some CBO orgs in which it may not be a structured internship, but getting the experience as part of that. So like with Latino Outdoors, when people volunteer through that, it's set up as professional development so that if, a entry point barrier is your wilderness first aid certificate and you're like, I don't even have a few $100 to like get that, that can be provided as part of your experience as well as the partnership with other orgs. But it's just recognizing that some of the ones that have been built at the federal level are in direct threat, while acknowledging you might still have a couple different pathways via the certain institutions or the community route.
Thank you so much, Jose. Erika, did you have anything that you wanted to add? Oh, are you might be muted. There you go.
I'm good, thank you.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you, Erika. All right, cool. Thank you so much for taking the time to answer. So we have another Q&A question here. This is from, apologies if I am butchering the name here, Marin, McLean, and Vic, who asks, how does your program or organization work with disabled individuals and include them in fieldwork? And this is open to anyone who's got applicable experience with that.
Yeah, I can. Oh, sorry, Erika, you go ahead.
So I was going to say I can jump in on this. So we partner with other organizations that are specifically tailored to building more accessible field environments in the geosciences. There's the International Association for Geoscience Diversity that does a lot of work on offering field-based experiences that are, modified to be more accessible. They also do a lot of virtual. And so they've done a lot of research and they have a lot of experience. And so we partner with them. And then also thinking about when a lot of the work that we do in our trainings are on field safety and recognizing that safety, right, again, includes, like, we have to make sure that people, regardless of their multiple identities, feel safe in the environment. And of course, accessibility and disability is one of those axes, right? And so that's something that we've been learning more in terms of the research and in terms of thinking about how do we bring in like some universal design, kind of principles. There's a lot of work in the geosciences in terms of like building inclusive classrooms. And so it's been really interesting kind of reading that literature and thinking about how do we apply that to like our labs or like our field environments. And so there's been, and not just, well, disability, but also thinking about like there's been a lot of more attention in our disciplines to thinking about mental health and like neurodivergence and how do we also make sure that we are creating research, training, learning environments that that support people of that support everybody, right? And think about, that we are all human, we're all individuals. We're not just scientists, we're not just students, we're not just faculty or researchers, right? But that we are individuals, and we should be able to bring as much of our whole selves as we want to our work. And so again, thinking about kind of field safety, thinking about how do we make our workplace environments more inclusive, like definitely, has to center also disability.
So, thank you so much, Erika. Jaida, I think you had something you wanted to say for that question, right?
Yeah, so I guess for field opportunities, like Erica said, there are, certain things where we have to be concerned about safety. We want to make sure that everybody is safe. But that doesn't mean that a person with a disability can't participate. And so, for example, for our like weekend workshops, one of our requirements is like you have to be able to lift 50 pounds because part of what we do is, this drum lining where we have to lift these big 50-pound concrete drums and drop them in the water. We want to make sure that everyone is safe enough to be able to do that. But we've had people on board that, have certain disabilities, and so we absolutely take that into account. We're able to, modify certain things of, okay, can you lift this one with one arm, or do you want someone to help you out with this? That sort of thing. And again, we're outside. We're in Miami. It's hot. If you need to go sit inside the boat cabin for a little bit, especially we get people that are seasick. So, it happens sometimes. It's like, hey, if you need to go inside and sit down, we can make these modifications. It's totally okay if you need a minute, if you need a little extra help with something, any of those modifications, we're absolutely happy to help with that. And we have so many people, on deck to help make sure that everything's running smoothly, because this is also a learning opportunity. So, ability or disability, things are, going to not always run perfectly smooth, and that's completely okay. That's the whole point of a learning opportunity. So regardless of ability level, we want to make sure everybody's being safe, that there's always someone there next to anyone that's, working with any of the lines or the sharks or anything to help in any situation, whether that be for a learning opportunity or for a disability reason that they may need a little extra support. Happy to make those accommodations.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jaida. I'm going to move on. I'll be asking y'all for your closing thoughts in just a moment. There's one last Q&A question I'd like to get to, and that's from Alexander Diaz, who asks, similar to the most recent question, how many of your programs or organizations assist transgender and gender diverse individuals looking to pursue that field? And this is open for anyone to answer.
I'll just mention quickly that we specifically use the language of gender minorities because we want to make sure that everyone knows that you are welcome here. Transgender, gender fluid, woman, whatever, you are welcome here. So we want to make sure that this is a space that people recognize that they are welcome, but that people also recognize that everyone is welcome. And if you have a problem with everyone being welcome, maybe find a new space or, keep those thoughts to yourself, whatever the case is. Like, we want to make sure that everybody is comfortable. If anyone comes to us with an issue, we are happy to, be a part of the support system. Hey, if you want to just vent to us, let us know. If you want us to help you find a solution to a specific, discriminatory instance or anything like that, like we have things in place for that specifically. So just making sure that everybody is comfortable, knows that they are fully supported in every way that we possibly can support them, and that they're welcome to come to us with anything, whether it's something that we need to adjust so that we can be a bit more inclusive, if that's the case, or if we need to help them with a different instance that occurred with someone else. We just want to make sure that everyone is feeling included and comfortable and recognized and supported in the ways that, in all the ways that they need to be supported.
All right. Thank you so much, Jaida. So I know we're getting a little, Erika, did you have something you wanted to add?
I was just going to follow up that in the climate survey that we conducted for the ecological sciences and earth and space sciences that we ran through some of the major professional associations and some of the nonprofit organizations, we specifically collected data on the experiences of non-binary and gender non-conforming scientists, and found that across the board, they experienced the most negative climates. And so that's something that we've been sharing and publicizing, and then working with our professional associations, because historically a lot of the work focused on the diversity was focused on gender, and it was women, and it was white women, and recognizing that, that we've made some advances for that particular group at the expense of other groups. And if we really want to recognize, right, if we really want to make our fields equitable and accessible to everybody, that we have to use different language than we were using in the past, right? And so a lot of our societies weren't even collecting data past, like, are you male or female? Not even woman or man, but are you male or female? So that's also something that we've been, as a team, we've got a diverse team of scientists that bring different perspectives that remind us all of this, but something that our data has been showing as well.
All right, thank you so much, Erika. I know we're getting close to time. We're going to just go over just slightly. I want to make sure everyone has the opportunity to share any closing thoughts they may have, because I know this is a very broad topic and you're all working in different parts of the field, but are working towards the same goals of just trying to make it more inclusive, trying to make it easier for people to participate, getting more voices. So I guess I'll go to Jose first, if you'd like to share any closing comments you have.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll be quick because I'll affirm what Erika and Jaida mentioned as well before. Even when I tell people, like, the pronouns, it's a reflection point that the pronoun isn't about me, it's about somebody else, because 99% of the time I'm not going to be misgendered. But I'm doing to normalize the practice in support of those that have to face the 99% of the time that they do. And so with that, my closing thought would be, I'll offer another kind of ecological wayfinding example as it's been helping me continue to be expansive in my own cultural wayfinding, but how I also work kind of engage across that diversity. And as Erika was mentioning earlier about partnerships, I tell people, like, when in doubt, I just pause and think about what the work together is like an ecotone. And so what the benefits of an edge effect can produce because of the greater abundance that can exist with how we hold a relationship, versus how us often as humans, we're very good about creating more of like border wall types of boundaries, which have one intent and purpose, but that might not be an opportunity to thrive together. And it doesn't mean don't have boundaries, but I really want to continue to challenge and push myself in terms of what is the logic that has underpinned relationships that are very othering compared to relationships that are more bridging with belonging.
Thank you so much, Jose. Jaida, do you have any closing statements you'd like to share?
I do. I just wanted to say I'm so grateful to be part of not only the community of Miss, but to have Miss be a part of the community of people that are trying to make the natural world a more open and accepting space. Or I guess not the natural world, but activity within the natural world a more open and accepting space. And so I just want to say I really appreciate the work that you all do as well. And yeah, thank you so much for having me here today. I'm really honored to be here.
Thank you so much, Jaida. Erika, do you have any closing statements you'd like to share?
I'm just saying, super excited to see again the range of organizations, early career individuals. Kudos to all the work that you put into this as well. Future Dr. Elcock. And yeah, I'm just even thinking about what the landscape looked like. I'm not that old, but thinking about what the landscape looked like when I was a grad student and what it looks like today in terms of the efforts that are happening, the people that are involved in this. And it's very hopeful and exciting. So thank you all.
Awesome. Thank you, Erika. Okay, so we're out of time today. So on behalf of Field Inclusive, I'd like to thank Jaida, Jose, and Erika for joining us today. And we thank you for all the work that you are doing and continue to do when it comes to being an inspiration to others in the natural science field, and for sharing your experiences. So again, thank you to everyone who joined us today. We will continue these conversations as we further our initiatives and work when it comes to amplifying social field safety issues, as well as amplifying minorities in STEM. Please be sure to follow and interact with us all on our social media channels, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube at the handle @FieldInclusive. Please also be sure to visit our website to learn more about our organization and the ways that you as an individual or organization can support us. Be sure to check out the rest of our virtual Field Inclusive Week events. Tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, we will have our Voices for Change panel, which will feature researchers and professionals discussing allyship from marginalized groups in the outdoors. When this webinar ends, you'll be prompted to fill out a brief 5-question survey. Please consider offering your thoughts, as this allows us to make our future Field Inclusive Weeks even better. In the event that the survey does not appear, you can always email us at info@fieldinclusive.org. We hope you all enjoy the rest of the day, and thank you again for joining us. Thank you, everybody.